watching Tidal Flooding Talk. We're here live on Saturday this time. We're usually Sunday, but we're always at the Irish Pub in Atlantic City and brought to you by the New Jersey Coastal Coalition.
I'm meteorologist Dan Skeldon, and in case you're saying, wait a second, I've been to the Irish Pub, and I've never seen this part of the Irish Pub. Palma and I think Tom Lamaine here to my left hasn't either. This is the hotel lobby upstairs. Yeah. Restaurant open for business downstairs, 25% capacity. Patio's still open, but to social distance and for peace and quiet and good social distance practicing, we're upstairs, and we welcome back for his yearly visit right during the peak of hurricane season. Man who needs no introduction, meteorologist Tom Lamaine. Tom, thanks for being here.
Anytime. I feel like I've stepped back in history here.
Isn't it nice? This is
like
so
like
plush.
a time machine.
Yeah,
it
it's
makes
great.
me want to stay here at the hotel.
Yeah, you get real comfortable. You don't want to leave.
Yeah.
And we hope you get comfortable with us for the next 20 to 30 minutes. We'll be fielding your questions and comments. Got any questions for Tom Lamaine, for myself, or Palma? Feel free to fire away. You want to just comment, criticize. Meteorologists are used to that as well. We welcome constructive criticism. Although, what is there to criticize about a sensational Labor Day weekend like this? Tom's just off the beach. The nice color to show for it. Warm water, 70-something degree water right now. And the second season, the shoulder season, the local season, beginning after Labor Day, and some good beach weather, and hopefully no hurricanes. But we will talk storms, flooding, and anything else you'd like to. So feel free to contribute to the discussion.
You know, that shoulder season, because of the pandemic, it may go down to the elbow. You know,
that's right.
I mean, there are people who, and we were talking about this just a couple of minutes ago, there are as many people on the beach on a Tuesday or Wednesday than there would normally be on a weekend, because they're not in school, they're not working, where else is there to go? But the free Atlantic City beach, free.
And it could be the packed Atlantic City beach, right?
Oh, yeah.
Very late this year, depending on what the weather has to offer. I think it's going to snow in Colorado and maybe down to the Texas Panhandle next week. But that cold weather is actually staying off to our west. We got some warm and sticky weather for a lot of the upcoming week, and we can talk about the forecast as well. So again, glad to have you here on a Saturday instead of a Sunday night, and hope you're enjoying your Labor Day weekend.
And before we get started, since it's so nice out this weekend, it might be a good time to remind everyone that you should make an emergency plan before you need it. You could sign up for your community's text alerts, know your town's evacuation route, and prepare a disaster supply kit. Don't forget your medications and important papers too.
All right, and this is my first time seeing Tom Lamaine. I want to say this year, since it's been kind of a crazy 2020, but not my first time chatting and texting with Tom. And I think meteorologists have forecasted a busy hurricane season, and so far it's delivered, and we're not even to the halfway point yet. But in those texts, and I agree with most of what you have to say most of the time, and this theory that it could be, but I like. I mean, I like the reasoning behind at least a theory you have, or at least a reason to watch the East Coast this year. So go off and do a little bit of that.
Well, I always like to have my questions answered before they're asked, because that's the best way to prepare. And I knew you would ask that question. I think, well, let me put it this way. We've had, 17 tropical systems?
We're up to the O storms. I think that's at least 15, and there's been a couple depressions, I think, too, yes. So it's been a busy year, yes.
Well, in addition to having that many systems develop this early in the season, what is really, to me, more amazing, or at least as amazing, is the fact that only 3 have become hurricanes.
Right.
And 2 barely hurricanes.
Right.
The only one that really, unfortunate for the people in Louisiana, Laura was the only one that really became a full-fledged hurricane. But to have that many tropical systems, 17 before September was here almost, and only 3 actually developed into hurricanes, it begs the question, why? And you have the answer as well as I do, right?
I have a theory.
Well, maybe we both have a theory. Why? Why didn't they develop? They try to, I say they, NOAA, NHC, I think once they have their mindset that something isn't happening. It's not happening, whether it's happening or not. And I was hesitant to dismiss the exit of the El Nino. And why? Because I saw the upper air patterns that are usually associated with El Nino still existing. And one of those patterns is one that causes developing storms not to strengthen because of wind shear. Now you have, as you know, you have the lower, what they call steering currents, and they always push the storms off the coast of Africa, bada bing, bada bing, bada bing, and then they travel west. Well, that's fine, but as soon as they try to turn north, which they have to because of surface conditions, they run into winds that are coming this way. So they have steering currents going this way and upper level or mid-level to upper level winds going this way. And as a pilot, that's the last thing I want to run into because that's wind shear.
Right.
And what happens is the storm, it wants so very hard to develop, but the wind shear is cutting off its, what they call a chimney. It doesn't have the exhaust to keep it going and flowing and developing and spinning and strengthening. And if that's the case, that's why we've had so many storms develop, but not strengthen. Because by the time they get into the 30s latitudes, they're running into that wind shear. And I can't think of any other reason to explain how you can have 17 systems and only 3 become hurricanes and 2 barely a hurricane. Can you?
Isaias was barely a hurricane, although still packed a punch here in South Jersey. And then we had the most recent one,
Right.
Nana, down in Belize. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and also Omar.
Right.
Now see, Omar leads me into my next idea about this whole thing. Okay, the good news is 17 storms, only one really caused catastrophic damage. Fortunately, only one. However, the flip side of that is if a storm does develop north of this wind shear, it has a very good chance of strengthening. If only because we have abnormally high surface temperatures in the water, SSTs, sea surface temperatures. The Gulf of Mexico. My daughter is a registered diver. She's qualified to dive as low as civilians can. And she has a dive watch that I got her for her birthday several years ago. And she was in the Gulf of Mexico, 95 degrees water temperature. So if a storm does develop outside of this wind shear and gets to a higher latitude, above the Florida Straits, you know, maybe east of the west coast of Florida, then it doesn't have wind shear.
And we saw that with Laura, where Laura was nothing, and then it got north of that latitude,
And boom.
and then it went to a Category 4.
Right, but Laura gave you plenty of warning.
Yes.
The ones I'm concerned about are the ones that develop all of a sudden, like Omar. Fortunately, Omar headed out to sea.
Right. Omar developed just off of North Carolina, but then shot out to sea. So you're more concerned that, let's say an Omar develops and the steering currents aren't out to sea, but maybe something that brings it towards the coast.
Well, just as important, how much warning did you have?
Very little.
See, these storms have developed right off the coast, and they're in very fertile water, I should say. As far as, you know, emergency management personnel, law enforcement, you don't have lead time with these. They develop, and there have been several of them. Several just developed off the tail end of a cold front or something. It doesn't take much, but they're the most dangerous ones. Not only do they develop quickly, because their thinking is, okay, I'm out of this danger zone where I can really start developing and strengthening. But not only that, I'm doing it real quick. And your lead time, you're not going to get the lead time you have with Laura.
Right.
What would you say is like the minimum and maximum amount of notice that we would get?
It depends. It depends on where you live. You know, if you live on the Outer Banks, you know, or if you live in Okeechobee or some of those islands that there's only one way on and one way off, and that's by boat, you need a lot more lead time than some people who live here, for instance. You know, you fortunately you have several highways to get off the barrier island. To answer your question, depends on where you live.
Okay, what about here? Living here?
Well, you know, it depends where you're. If you live in Strathmere, you probably need a lot more lead time than you do if you live in Atlantic City. One way in, one way out, and you really are more susceptible to a tropical system in Strathmere than you are in Atlantic City. Not to say it depends on a lot of things: the direction the storm is coming in, when it's coming in, high tide, low tide, you know.
Yeah. Now I'm going to pose a addendum to this question here, and that is, you know, when they come off Africa, we see them coming, and it takes 10 to 14 days to cross the ocean. So if there's a full-fledged hurricane that's coming off Africa, well, develops off Africa, it's going to come up the East Coast. We know about it for days to a week, so that's not going to be a surprise, like a Gloria or an Isabel or something along those lines. If a system does develop east of South Carolina and shoots up the coast, we could have a day or two warning. My question is, even when people have 7 or 8 days warning, don't they usually wait till the last minute to evacuate? Because I know, you know, people, you know, it's not going to come. I'll wait. I'm not gonna leave. And we've seen that with evacuations where, you know, people, it takes days to evacuate. You're absolutely right. The lead time should be high because South Jersey in some places are very difficult to evacuate. But do people always take advantage of the time that some hurricane forecasts provide?
Well, Dan, if you have a way to change human nature, please let me know.
I've been working on it, and so far I've struck out. And I think you've been working on it, or not working on it, but you forecasted it a lot longer than me. And
well, look at the people who chose to ride out Laura.
Right.
You know, there was destruction and catastrophic damage all around them, but amazingly, and fortunately, not too many casualties.
But when you put the line in there, insurvivable storm surge,
yeah, I've never heard that.
You would imagine that would
you know,
get people to leave. I mean,
you know, if what they were describing didn't work before, let's try unsurvivable and see how that if that doesn't scare the heck out of them. But you know,
of course, there's a caveat to that, though. Let's say they stay and they survive the insurvivable storm surge. How can you get any dire warning than that?
Well, as some local authorities say, if you decide to ride out the storm, please put your name, address, next of kin on a note and tie it to your toe, so that when we find your body, we'll know who you are.
Yeah, that might scare someone.
Well, that would get my attention. Yeah, and you know what? We're leaving. You know, I'm like the sheriff of many counties, or the head of emergency management. It's like the skipper on a ship, the last one to leave. You know, last one to go overboard. But here's my word: before I leave, just let us know who you are. You know, tattoo your name on your chest or something, or you know, like they do with the with the bodies in the morgue. Put your name and address and next of kin on your on a note and tie it to your toe so we know who you are.
Well, do you think that South Jersey has learned anything from Superstorm Sandy, or even, you know, what happened with Hurricane Irene, with people evacuating?
Well, one of the things I hope, and I think they have learned about Hurricane Sandy, is don't change the name of the storm as it's ready to make landfall. And I was at an emergency management conference, which is held every year here in Atlantic City. The year that happened, the following fall, and or it was, we usually have it in like April, March, something like that. And I said, one of the dumbest things that NOAA or NHC, and I think it was mainly NOAA. NHC was hesitant because when I talked to Rick Knabb, who was then the NHC director at that time, I said, Rick, am I wrong in thinking this way? Why would you say Sandy is no longer a hurricane? What good does that do? It serves inter-office nomenclature very well because oh, well, you know, some cold air came into the core and it became extratropical. So what? It's still a hurricane for most folks. And when you say it's not a hurricane, it kind of relaxes all the energy, preparedness, and alertness that the emergency management personnel have tried to put into the public.
Right, especially if you're not a meteorologist and you wouldn't
They
fully
don't know.
understand the difference between a hurricane and a superstorm.
So to answer your question, what we have learned, they're not going to do that again. You know, especially when a storm, anytime, but especially when a storm is about to make landfall. Relax your preparedness because it's no longer a hurricane. Oh yeah? Why? It's still a very strong storm that's going to do destructive damage. You may be serving your inner office personnel by saying, oh, because we got a cold air core now, huh? I know what it is, but it's no longer a hurricane. Wrong. That was the biggest lesson. Anybody, and I think they agreed now that they will never do that again. And thank God, because that was terrible. When I heard that, I went, what are you doing?
It was, and as a broadcast meteorologist at the time, remember we had Irene in 2011 and Sandy in 2012. Irene had hurricane warnings, wasn't that bad. Sandy, we knew was going to be worse, but there's no hurricane warnings. So people will say, wait a second. Irene wasn't that bad,
Yeah, you know.
and we had hurricane warnings. Well, there's no hurricane warnings for Sandy, and it was a communications failure. They did fix it. You're absolutely right. It won't happen again. And with each storm, we kind of learned something.
But you know, if I didn't bring that up at that meeting, because there were NWS chief meteorologists from Long Island, and they were going, no, we did the right thing. I said, no, you didn't. Ask any of these emergency management personnel who are in this room if you did the right thing. And then finally, Rick Knapp, who is now with the Weather Channel, I believe,
Yes.
he was the NHC director at the time, he finally agreed with me, but there were still National Weather Service chief meteorologists who were saying, oh, no, we were right about doing that. It was not a tropical system anymore, it was extratropical. So what?
And at what point did they actually change it?
50 miles before offshore. 50
I
miles.
would say it was like an hour or two before
Yes,
landfall, actually.
and you know what-
How do you think that impacted?
Well, I asked the
behavior?
emergency personnel that were in the conference that year. I said, did it cause you to relax your attentiveness? Did it cause you to relax your preparedness? Oh yeah, we got like a sigh of relief saying it's no longer a hurricane. Does that answer your question? That's dangerous. And-
Messaging is very, very important.
And you know what really, and you know, they'll deny this as well. But to CYA, they said that Hurricane Sandy didn't make landfall in this area. Matter of fact, Brigantine and Atlantic City were in the eye of the hurricane. Didn't make landfall until 7 o'clock that night. Wrong. Because I was measuring. The things you measure to know when you're in the eye of the hurricane, the wind, the pressure, the rain. That made landfall in the Atlantic City Brigantine area around 6 o'clock at night. Now, why would they want to say it didn't make landfall until 7 o'clock? Because they don't want to be guilty of saying we changed the designation of Sandy from a hurricane into a non-hurricane 50 miles offshore. We feel a little better if we said we did that 100 miles offshore. So that would have delayed the land. You know, I may be the only one saying that.
Oh,
But-
I said it too. I was on the air at 6 o'clock that night in Linwood saying Sandy has made landfall.
Exactly.
And I said it on the air, and I swear by this. 30 years from now, when we're all retired and gone, and they're going to reanalyze the storm, and they're going to say, you know what, Sandy was a hurricane at landfall, and it made landfall. And there'll be a reanalyzation of data, which they do with storms on occasion.
Sure.
And I still think that. So
Well, I'm glad they rethought the thinking of never to do that again.
Well, you're always referring to it as hurricane.
If I say the word superstorm one more time after I've just said it, shoot me. No, it's Hurricane Sandy. Got that, folks? Hurricane Sandy.
So wasn't it something also about the insurance or something?
If you want to get into that part,
No, but
I'm not.
I just-
No, I hope. I know, even though that's going to benefit some folk by saying they're going to make out better with their insurance policies because of that. How about those who had their lives taken
Right.
or their property that is probably suffered more damage than their insurance is going to cover. If that's true, that means they've inserted politics into the forecasting of a storm, and
Okay.
that.
I believe every bit of that.
we put enough politics into everything today, don't we?
We do.
You're right.
And
We like to leave it out of weather forecasting if
Exactly.
we can.
Absolutely.
Well, if you are watching live on Facebook, you could add questions or comments. There are quite a few questions.
Good.
Or I'm sorry, comments.
was there a
This-
National Weather Service meteorologist?
I don't
involved, probably
see
saying,
them,
"What the
but
heck's he
maybe
talking
they're
about?"
under a fake alias over here. Okay, but Liz Toller says that it was the biggest mistake they made with Sandy is that they never issued a hurricane warning for the New Jersey shore, even though they asked people to evacuate. People didn't take it seriously because it was not a hurricane warning.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, let me take it a little bit deeper. A hurricane warning can only be issued when you are expecting hurricane force winds, right?
We define hurricanes by wind. Yes, correct.
What is that wind speed?
74 miles an hour.
How about if the storm is approaching Atlantic City and it only has 72-mile-an-hour winds? Doesn't qualify for a hurricane warning, does it? There's no wiggle room in that. It's too, same thing, but what's the difference between a Category 1 and a Category 2 storm?
About 20 miles an hour.
20 miles. Do you think that's really going to make a big amount of difference to folks? Oh, it's only a Category 1. Yeah, but another 20 miles or so, it could be a Category 2.
And another thing too, since we are dissecting Sandy, that's what this is. I think it's great. I think it's a great discussion. And this is another change they've made now too. Not necessarily due to Sandy, but they do, in addition to issue hurricane watches warnings, tropical storm watches warnings, they do issue storm surge warnings now, which is a useful product.
Right.
Because with Sandy, very few places saw hurricane force winds,
Right.
but many places saw the storm surge that a Category 2 or 3 hurricane would bring ashore. And realistically, I mean, at the Jersey Shore, we're never going to see a Category 4 or 5 hurricane come up the coast with winds of 140 miles an hour, but we are going to have to deal with the theme of this show, tidal flooding and storm surges worse than what we saw in Sandy. That's our worst case scenario. Would be a storm surge like they saw in North Jersey down here.
Well, don't forget, storm surge has everything to do with the direction of the storm.
Yes.
And as unusual as it was for Hurricane Sandy to make a left-hand turn at this latitude, where 99% of the storms when they get to this latitude at least veer off to the northeast, Hurricane Sandy came perpendicular to the coastline. Well, it had been coming perpendicular to the coastline for some time, which means it was building up the storm surge, and even though Atlantic City did not get the brunt of the wind, because that happened in the northeast quadrant of a hurricane, which it always does, which means Monmouth, Ocean County, they had the most damage from winds. But when you're talking about a storm surge that is coming in from what we call a latitude from east to west, which is very unusual. Hurricane Sandy just pushed water. At the same time, if you get a hurricane coming up from the south and it stays offshore, most of the surge is going from, unless you have a fetch, unless it's been developing winds that are 1,000 miles offshore and it's continuing way in advance of the hurricane to push the water inland more. Or if it happens to come up west of Atlantic City or west of the Jersey Shore and comes up the Delaware Bay, now you're talking about bay flooding because that surge is pushing up that way. So, in answer to one of your earlier questions, what region is more vulnerable? The hurricane determines that. Which, and as tough as Sandy was, it was the east. Even though it was so unusual to say that a storm is going to make a left-hand turn at this latitude, there was no other place for Sandy to go. And the reason is because Sandy occurred last weekend in October, right?
Yes.
Yep.
when did the superstorm occur? The one they made a movie out of?
Last weekend of
Halloween.
October. Halloween of
Halloween,
91.
right?
Yep.
Well, if you look on the average of what the synoptic weather pattern is in the Atlantic Ocean, late October, it's a lot different than it is early September or late August, because the same ridge or blocking pattern that occurs right now moves north. So if a hurricane develops that late in the season, again, 3 days before the end of hurricane season?
November 30th, right?
Oh, I'm sorry.
But it's at the
right.
very end.
Very end of
Yeah,
hurricane
yeah,
season.
yep.
Another thing you should not feel safe about. Oh, we're at the end of hurricane season. Yeah? Well, tell people about that. But the perfect storm, again, when was that? Halloween. When's Halloween? The last weekend in October. There's two similarities there to tell you that when a tropical system develops that late in the season, there's a very good chance that it's going to do something that it wouldn't do earlier in the season.
Yep.
And one of them is make a left-hand turn when it gets east of Atlantic City.
So for this area, would a storm that hits later in the hurricane season be more dangerous, or does it all depend on every other factor?
Every other factor. Every other factor. We don't know where the steering currents will be. If all of a sudden we get into a La Nina pattern, well, then it's a free-for-all for hurricanes. And especially, if you're going to have storms that are going to come up this far from, up the East Coast. So many factors are involved. The sea surface temperature. If there was another storm that occurred before this hurricane and churned up the waters so that you had so much upwelling that it didn't have the warm water energy that it normally would have to help it strengthen. What I mentioned before was the synoptic weather pattern. Not only at the surface where you have this ridge over the Atlantic, but also what we call mid to upper level troughs that can draw a hurricane into its area. So the whole synoptic weather pattern will determine a lot.
And Sandy was a great forecast in that 7 or 8 days. You said left turn, very unusual, but it was the only thing it could do.
Exactly.
And we had ample warning with Sandy. And I always contrast that because 2012 was, for me, the meteorologically most significant year of my life, just because, we lived through Sandy and we had the derecho a few months earlier with minutes warning. Sandy had a week's warning. And it was a perfect forecast as much as we had flaws in the forecasting and warning system.
Also flaws in the reporting.
Yes.
Showing boardwalk that was already destroyed, saying it was destroyed by Sandy.
Yes.
Hey, don't let facts get in the way of a good story, I mean, that's, when I saw it, I said, national broadcast showing a boardwalk. Oh, this was just, look at the destruction that Sandy has brought. This boardwalk had been in disrepair for 20, 30 years. Oh, yeah, but it made good video, didn't it? Yeah. And don't forget, I'm speaking at my former profession. And maybe that's why I'm not in the profession anymore, because watch out. Lamaine's coming in. He's going to screw up our story because it's not going to snow. Everybody's saying it's going to snow, Tom. How come you're not? Because I don't think it is. Oh, we're so disappointed. No snow? Are we going to have flurries? Yeah. You want me to lead with flurries? Your call. Really, the last 5 years, of my broadcasting in Philadelphia was basically turned out to be what I just said. We're leading with what? And I'm not sour grapes because I am very fortunate. I had 50 years in broadcasting, and I was born at the right time because what it has become today is something I probably would not be involved in if I had the same decision to make today that I had back then when I was discharged from the Navy.
So you don't agree with the hype?
Do you?
No.
And I don't either. And I have to say a caveat here in that I've been so fortunate to work at NBC 40 then and WFMZ in the Lehigh Valley now, where they do respect the, hey, this is not leadable. Hey, you know, it's a tornado watch. This was just the other day. But you know what? We're too far north. We're not going to get anything. You can lead with it if you want, but
Right.
here's what you should write in the T's, and they're great, and they don't hype,
No.
and I think it's a
Well, here's
big problem with media in general nowadays. But I've had great employers, and a great employer now, you know, believes in just keeping it real, you know, not hyping, not scaring, and unfortunately, the media business is going in the other direction.
Well, here's something else that'll get you on the good side of management. You don't think it's going to snow tomorrow, right, Tom? No, I don't. And you know what? Because I don't think it's going to snow, all that overtime you're going to pay extra crews to go out and find snow tomorrow, you can save that money. Tell them to stay home. No more overtime. And you know what? When everybody, and one of the instances, and the news director never questioned my forecast again, because I said, don't call in the extra crews tomorrow. We're not going to have any snow. Okay, well, I'm going to have one crew standing by, fine. But instead of having 3 or 4 going out to all corners of the Delaware Valley to report on snow that's not going to happen, save your money.
Yep.
That's the best way to get some credibility with management.
I don't know, there could have been a few school kids wearing their pajamas inside out or spoon under their pillow. Could have changed
Whatever
the
works,
forecast
right?
there.
Yeah,
We do have another Facebook question
Sure.
from Eileen. She wants to know, do you think people who stayed during Sandy will take future evacuations seriously?
Depends on how they were affected. If it scared the heck out of them, yeah. They say, I'll never do this again, if they were very fortunate. But again, as I said to Dan earlier, you can't figure out human nature, and you can't change human nature. And depending on what experience they had riding out that storm, will answer the question whether they're going to ride out the next one.
Hopefully that next one is not coming. The peak season, peak of hurricane season officially, September 10th or 11th.
My birthday is September 14th.
Really? Okay.
So you can imagine how many of my birthday parties have been really affected by hurricanes.
Absolutely. I mean, September is normally one of the nicest months of the year, except it's the peak of hurricane
Hurricanes,
season.
That's
right.
1944.
1944.
That was one of my birthdays. Yep, that was it.
Great Atlantic Hurricane 1944.
Mom, water's coming in the window. We didn't have warnings. Mom, hey mom, there's water coming in the window. And you know, back then all the all the men were at war. And as young as I was I was the oldest male in the neighborhood.
And yeah, in case you haven't noticed, Tidal Flooding Talk filmed in front of a live studio audience of one, who's also participating in the conversation. And again, we are at the Irish Pub, St. James Place in Atlantic City. We are upstairs in this beautiful hotel lobby. We do have our masks, not wearing them on here. It's ultimately 4 people in this huge hotel lobby. Downstairs, the Irish Pub thriving. Glad to have indoor restaurants back. You can visit them. Are they open 24/7 yet or not, Tom?
How do you like my politically correct
They're
mask?
close.
They're pretty close to opening 24/7 now.
United States Navy.
Nice. Very nice.
Carry on.
Thank you for your service.
Well, we do want to thank you for joining us
Quite well.
again. And the Irish Pub would like to provide an Irish Pub T-shirt.
All right.
To add to your collection.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You could probably wear that on the beach of Atlantic City. Too.
I will.
Another nice, good beach day coming up for your Sunday and Monday as well.
Several
right?
good beach days, I would
That's
imagine,
right.
this week, right?
And then right now, there's just a bunch of tropical waves off Africa. That's the only area we're watching. And because it's so
Wave.
far, 10
Wave.
14 days. That's right.
Tropical
so
waves. Bye.
That's it. And then hopefully they go by out to sea. Appreciate you guys being with us. And again, Tidal Flooding Talk wants to thank the Irish Pub and, of course, the New Jersey Coastal Coalition for bringing this to you normally every Sunday. We'll be back in this room for a while with the way things are going. Probably for the rest of the year, we'll have most of our shows up here, I'm presuming. But please feel free to visit the Irish Pub. Open, I think, restaurants, movie theaters. All very happy this weekend, and hopefully having a great holiday weekend. And we'll see you back here next Sunday night at 7 o'clock.
Good night.